All right. Well, welcome all to our sort of wrap up and conclusion call for the weekend. Um, we'll be doing some general processing of the last few rounds of content that's been going up and good conversations that have begun percolating, reflection exercises and such. So I'm not going to preamble too much. I'm going to pass it over to Dad to convene and catalyze that conversation as he does so well.
Great. Well, welcome all, both of those of you who are physically with us at the moment or virtually with us at the moment, and those of you who will be joining us later in the reruns of this spectacular event. Yeah, so we've had a full day and overnight of a lot of rich interaction. So I thought it would be best, we thought it would be best if we just took some time to do some reflection. Since our midday session today, there's been several rounds of content that have gone up, and you've had opportunity to do some reflections. There have been blog posts happening. You've been reading of each other's, and a lot of good stuff. Just a couple of just quick observations. First, just the power of language, how helpful it is to have language that helps articulate things. There's been a lot of things resonating in different people, and people, a lot of ahas, a lot of people saying, yeah, and even a certain amount of different people at different times saying something along the lines of, this is actually helping give me language for things I've sensed that I didn't even know how to really quite get at. But, you know, I read years ago something about, I don't remember the full quote. You should never do what I'm doing next. But something about he who defines the language. Justin, can you help me here? He who defines the terms wins.
Yes.
But it was actually a little bit nicer version of that, having to do with the languaging side of that there's something powerful about getting the language that kind of defines the conversation. In a sense, the right language actually defines the conversation. I mean, I feel like that's partly what's been going on. We've been getting some fresh language, and even the theme of the weekend the way we named it came out of a previous retreat where we went back and forth and around the room around the issue of what's the right language for this stuff. Recognizing that, for instance, the term message or message, you know, life message tends to be narrow, and certain things tend to be off-putting because people feel like I'm never going to be on a podium speaking, so that must not apply to me. So anyway, the idea that we've come up now with this, we're currently using core personal material as kind of a broad umbrella term. And I'm going to just pause and revisit that with everybody. Is that working for you as we've spent, 36 hours interacting around that, defining it, fleshing it out, filling it out both biblically and experientially and anecdotally from different people's lives? Is that language working for you? Is that are there adjustments to that? And then also just anything you want to just reflect about how having fresh language and maybe some new categories is already proving useful to you, and potentially how it can prove useful to us as a community as we have some fresh language and we can then interact with each other around that in a similar way as people who've been through DDQ have found kind of a set of language and can say, I just had a dozen people versus I just had this really amazing experience, and then you share it with someone and they go, great, thanks for sharing. So then it's like thud. So that kind of, not just languaging, but categories, working categories that resonate in a larger community. That's some of what we're developing here. We have some work to do. We'll keep fleshing that out. I love the way Chris and SJ have pushed out, for instance, in the developmental kind of timeline thinking and simplified language. And now talking about basically a consolidated framework that talks about emergence and maturation and convergence, kind of three broad strokes developmental phases. And then there's all the more technical sub-phases and Clintonian language that are under that. So I'm even seeing some overlapping here. how do we come to understand some of these developmental processes through the emergence phase of our life, through the maturation and growing phase of our life, and then into a convergence mode as it relates to this theme of core personal material. So any thoughts on the language piece, what's useful, what's been happening for you, and or anything that hasn't been working that you want to just kind of throw on the table real quick before we shift into a broader conversation? Thoughts on that?
Well, I'll just say, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, because we're a little bit further away, so I'm gonna just clear out how the mic is working. Yeah, I really like the language. Material is broad enough for me that it's can take so many different forms. I think you illustrated that well in terms of how your dad, Don's core material is, hands on, is, your core message being maybe something that's more for those who are gifted in the verbal domain. So I really like it. And I'll just go with that. I mean, for me, the core piece is really powerful in that it doesn't get more personal. I don't know, you need to say personal core. It's just your core. It is a gift. I think the way we've talked about it is really, it's gift, it's how we steward it, but it's as gift, it's as much, it brings together, for me, kind of where I'm at, we've kind of made this, I don't know if it's an artificial distinction or real, between the salvation and then what you do afterwards with it. And I think for me, it's kind of brought it all together. It is your salvation that you are now living, and so it is gift, and yet we discover it, we work it out, and that's been helpful. The Philippians passage about working it out with fear and trembling, but it's all the same stuff. So it's all core. It's all core to our faith. And it is really, it's just our loss if we don't explore this. So if you want to call it losing your salvation, I don't know. But, you lose, and yeah, you could be, you have some fear and trembling about that, I guess. But it is gift. So don't struggle to find it. And that's a big message that has come through to me is run with it. The bits and pieces you get, it's all part of the discovery. The discovery is for some reason, God gets a thrill out of that, maybe. And maybe God's discovering some things here too with us, just because, this really is an open process. So there, I'll stop with that.
Good. Thanks, Charles. Anybody else on the language? We won't belabor this, but opportunity to speak into that if it's. Thank you, Adam. Go for it.
Yeah. Material sounds like this raw thing, like iron ore or wood, like a log, or it's not refined, and message is a lot more refined. So I really like using the word material instead of message. It just has a lot broader, and it sort of tells you there's going to be some work to do to get this into a package that anybody else can use, really, with any effectiveness. If you want to make a spoon or something out of your iron ore, you're going to have to work it, So
Right.
like that.
Right. Good. Thank you. Very helpful. Good.
I just wanted to add, can I add one piece about that?
Sure. Yep.
Just wanted to say that I feel like the melding of core material and stewardship has been really helpful for me, because up until now, a lot of times when I've heard core material talked about, I've heard it in a ultimate distillation sense of like, it's the thing you earn the right to do eventually after decades and much processing. It's sort of the ultimate outcome of your journey with God. You get to have some core material. So taking a step back and merging it more with the idea of stewardship and the process of discerning what you've been given to steward, for me, that becomes so much more inclusive and engaging, because we are all responsible to figure out what we're stewarding, and we ought to be doing that all the time at every stage, and it will look differently ultimately, and what that stewardship will look like will change.
Yeah.
But that has been a really helpful joining of language.
Right. Okay, good. Let's shift and interact around any of the new content that's been posted, any of your reflection processes as you've interacted with the reflection questions, and interacted around anybody else's posts, blog posts, any of those kind of things. Just think out loud together a bit about what you're hearing, what impacted you, particularly about the process of discovering, naming, stewarding, owning, articulating our core material. Any thoughts about that from anyone as you've been going through this process? It looks like the Buller mic is off. Does that mean someone's ready to share?
I don't think we ever turned it off.
Well, I'm just sensing maybe Karen has something to share. Karen, do you have something to share?
There you go.
Actually, I don't at the moment.
Okay, all right.
You're so in tune, Dad.
That's just putting you on notice, Karen. Okay, Charles, what were we going to say?
The obvious, and you already stated it, the power of naming it. I think of Adam naming the animals. What was that? That is a very powerful thing, and it's intrinsic again for humanity. And gives definition and permission and authority, if you will. Maybe that's the right term, but I found even the bits and pieces of naming things related to core material, kind of a joyful thing. So that's been really, again, very obvious, but very powerful.
One thing I noticed when I wrote a blog to respond to the reflection prompt, which I felt a little silly doing because I wrote the reflection prompt. But as I was doing it, I realized, like, wait a minute. I think what struck me was that it was a really simple process that brought about really helpful insights. Like, even though I had written the questions, sitting down to actually answer the questions was hard and good. But it wasn't like magic bullet-y, it was just kind of like, here's 5 questions to sit down and think about. But somehow I think it goes back to the languaging piece, thinking about it in this sense of going all the way back to what we were talking about on Friday night, beginning from the premise that, yes, I have unique, valuable things that God is refining in me. And it doesn't need to be a question of wrestling with if or but how will that be? It's a process of identification of things, and then sort of clarity will come from that. Somehow naming those things within that context gave them a completely different weight for me. And it's all stuff that I've kind of either heard said to me or have said myself before in different ways, but putting it within that framework of, okay, I'm thinking about who has God given me to give this to. It was really helpful for me in a kind of a surprising way at how helpful it was, how quickly. And I think that has everything to do with kind of the parameters that we're beginning to establish around this mode of thinking. But the other thing that struck me as I was doing it was like, okay, this is probably like a really nice skim of the surface. This is clearly going to take a lot of time. And I don't mean a lot of time in terms of like hours and hours and hours of sitting here slaving it out. I mean, I'm going to have to think about this over a long period of time, because there's just things that I'm not going to see or get if I'm just racking my brain right now. But now that I'm thinking in this way and can be a little more intentional about what to do with the pieces as I see them, I think over a broader period of time, other things are going to emerge, and I'll be able to add to that. So
I think Justin, what you just illustrated, or what you're talking about, also taps into since the founding of the L3 community, we've been talking about and referencing the concept of the discipline of reflection. It's not usually listed on the list of spiritual disciplines, but thinking, kind of, again, that's new language. The discipline of reflection. Reflection itself is a discipline. It takes discipline. It requires a discipline. It's a muscle that can be developed like any other kind of discipline-related muscle, and it's one that you can do for a while and then slack off of, and the muscle can get flabby, etc. But just like any other discipline, the community can be really helpful in our lives in helping us, particularly in areas where we lack discipline, or where maybe we're trying to develop a new discipline. Think of someone wanting to lose weight, or maybe a prayer discipline or a fasting discipline, and think of the ways that the community in your life or other people at different times, as you've worked at developing a new discipline. It's not just a totally private thing. It goes better in the context of relationships and mentors and community and friends and so forth. So in this area of the discipline of reflection, partly what happened this weekend is by carving out space and saying, we're going to think about this together. We're going to block out some time, and we're going to think about these things, and we're going to do it in concert. We're gonna interact around these things, and then we're going to talk with each other about what we're thinking and what our questions are and what our learnings are. And then we're going to add this to our community discussion as something that we're going to keep talking about in various ways, which we're going to need to, before we get off here, we'll talk more about how do we keep having this discussion? How do we keep this conversation going? But I think partly even what you were just saying, Justin, is you were engaging a process privately, but also in the context of a community process that was saying, I'm now asking some questions, not just off in a corner by myself, but I'm interacting around this with some other people, and we're all raising the bar on this discipline of reflection in this particular area, which it's not so much that it's a magic bullet, like you said, or it's not rocket science. It's just a matter of doing it, of actually stopping to sit down, focus on, and do that reflection about this thing. That's what brings the fresh insight, fresh movement, or whatever it might be. So I think we're all experiencing that in various ways. I certainly have been. I've got a bunch of new stuff that I'll be blogging on in the next few weeks, because in this area that has been core material for me for years, I've got new insights as we've been interacting. Anybody else on in response to, for instance, think particularly of the videos of the afternoon. I think both Wendy's video and Lynn's video beautifully illustrated the process in process. In other words, them kind of talking out of their current journey of engaging this issue, some of the wrestling, some of the questions they've had, some of their own inner ambiguities along the way, and then as they've leaned into it, some of the movement, some clarity that's been coming, and some new discoveries that they've been making in the process. Anybody else just reflect on what you were hearing and seeing in those two videos as they shared honestly and vulnerably, kind of from their own personal, core material discovery process journey. Anybody?
Yeah, I'm in bed, so you're not seeing me. Sorry.
Okay.
I think the big red button question was great for me too, simply because I think this process is forcing me to hit it. So having the communal space to reflect, and it's just really good. And there's more there, and it's like, oh my goodness, there's more there. And I think, again, something that Mindy said yesterday, just the willingness to step into talking about this. Immediately, I come up with a million core lies and think, well, not a million. I've got a pretty substantial set of core things that push against it immediately. And it's really healthy and good to be able to recognize that. And I'm having some conversations with Jesus, which I wouldn't be having otherwise, which I need to be having because it's pressing some things in me emotionally, which is very interesting. So it's been good. It's been a good process so far.
Great.
Although I've been asleep for half of it. But it's kind of, it really started last month when we were together anyway. But yeah, no, it's been good.
Great. I think that moves us really into the kind of where we want to kind of move here as we wrap up the live conversation, which is thinking about how we now take this and kind of cultivate an ongoing conversation. I don't know, Justin, if you want to jump in and give some thoughts about that process, both the next 72 hours in particular and ongoing. Where do we go from here, and how do we steward the process that we've begun?
Yeah. Well, we had a couple of sort of thoughts and questions. One, I don't know if it's an observation so much exactly, but yeah, she'll call it an observation that I've had from this process is observing the value of periodic conversation. This whole theme was catalyzed at what we're used to being the kind of environment where we can have these kinds of conversations. Our original idea of fusions, which is sort of a live gathering kind of thing, but I've experienced it as extremely fruitful and effective to kind of engage this ongoing conversation in this mode. And this model has taken a fair bit of pre-planning and coordination and all those things. But there might be a way to do a somewhat more streamlined or pared down version of something that facilitated opportunities for these kinds of conversations or other kinds of conversations. So one question we just wanted to sort of throw out was, this has been very much a trial run experiment that we've launched into, and we'd be curious to hear people's thoughts and feedback. Has it been working well, not working well, worth pursuing or continuing to refine as a way of continuing to cultivate and engage these kinds of conversations, maybe even more frequently than once a year? It'd be great to have a conversation about that. That would be very helpful. And then the other thing we would like to talk about would be sort of general thoughts about ways to kind of make this conversation not just be sort of, we talked about it for a weekend and kind of it was helpful, and then we go on to getting busy and whatnot. Obviously, we have the L3 platform as a really great general Petri dish catalyst space. Are there some ways or some disciplines, if you will, or that we might want to engage to kind of really ground this conversation for a period of time or for a longer stretch of time, so that we can actually, I would love to see us start to dig in and get to the point where we're helping each other to gain specific clarity on some of these things, taking it beyond just the level of, hey, these are really helpful paradigms. Again, for me, it was this evening even, it was really helpful to go from, hey, these are some great questions, to, hey, let me answer these great questions. And it was hard to do, but then it was really fruitful. So what are some ways that we can work at encouraging and supporting each other in that conversation as well? So maybe we'll start off with with just general thoughts and feedback about this platform / model as a way of focusing in on a general community conversation around a theme. Thoughts about that, feedback about that, how that's gone, things that could improve it in the future, etc.
I'll go first. The platform's been really fun. I mean, I don't have much hesitation about technical online meetings, which sometimes some people get freaked out about or just don't want to bother with. So that isn't as much of an issue for me. I will say, though, that it's like tying it to Fusion. It's definitely not on any level similar to the live in-person gathering, to the amount of like relational things that have been able to happen. Like I found myself wanting to be in the live in the room space more, even though obviously I would have had to plan differently, like with my kids and all of that's basically, you know, when you do a live, it's even more so that you've set aside that time. And so obviously it's going to be more fruitful or whatever. But but I still totally love what we've done this weekend. Yeah, I would see doing them more. Potentially could be cool more often, or like a check-in meeting on this particular topic would be helpful, because especially since I was juggling multiple things, it's like since someone was going to actually show up at a time and you could be part of that, it helped push the work out, you know, for me. So that helped the discipline a little bit today, to whatever little degree that I was able to do it, which got better after Nate got home from work. So anyway, those are a few thoughts so far.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Amber.
We should probably clarify that we are thinking of a both and, not an either or approach for the future. We agree that some FaceTime, some opportunities for face-to-face interaction in the L3 community are still important. Trying to kind of evaluate this model, this approach as a way of working at some of those dynamics, frankly, that can potentially include a larger circle of people that may not be able to make the trek, you know, wherever the live Fusion event happens to be taking place. And that already, just in this process, there's, beyond those that have actually showed up on video here in these live interactions, there's another, I don't know, about 8 or 10 people interacting, and some that weren't able to be involved at all over the weekend and are planning to interact with all the material after the weekend's over. So it casts a little bit of a wider net this way, and can be accessible in some other ways. So we are going to be doing both, and we're one thing we're trying on for size, I just put this out there, is the idea of doing a live Fusion event every other year, planning it well in advance so everyone has the dates, and then you can, you know, plan on it, schedule around it, give it priority. Hopefully people are able to, you know, make it work if it's maybe a little less frequent, plan further in advance, etc. And then do this kind of thing. We were thinking a virtual Fusion, you know, in the off year, but I think we're beginning to think thoughts beyond that, maybe even something like maybe a pared down version of something like we did now, like a day or an afternoon, maybe even more frequently than, you know, once every other year, a couple times a year or something like that. So kind of putting it all out there, your feedback would be extremely helpful both now and in the future. Thoughts now, anyone?
Just to say that, yeah, it's the live piece that really connects for me. Always a temptation when I know I can get it later to get it later. I mean, that may not be healthy, but that's just the reality. But when I know this is going to be live interaction, it's like, I like that. And I feel very connected via the video. So I do this a lot anyway. So, but it's true, it's not quite the same as being in the same room. So granted that, I just wondered about maybe like you said, like an afternoon. And also the idea of, I don't know if you could do smaller groups. You know, there's some of the things that we would think of doing if we were there in person, that would just be more live interaction, more processing interaction. Certainly the discipline of blogging is good, and we will continue that. But as much live interaction, I think for more focused, maybe, you know, not spread out over quite as much time, or I mix it up. But the point is, like that idea of an afternoon, where I can pretty much count. I mean, we're just going to be working through things, and I may get together with somebody else if we have to use Skype or some other medium. I don't know how this Zoom thing works in terms of, you know, just two peers finding each other, but that's where it's at for me. So I love this, and I want more. Yeah.
I hear you saying, Charles, that the live interaction, including the virtual live interaction, has an order of magnitude more value to you than simply content made available that you would do at your own time. One of the dimensions that we didn't explore this time that does work is that we do a larger group interaction, and then we actually have breakout sessions where people can do breakouts, you know, in 2s, 3s, 4s, whatever, virtually.
Yeah.
And I've thought about the idea, if we do a shorter time, like an afternoon, that we do something that literally, that the idea is you block off the entire time,
right,
and that's all you do.
Yep.
And it's almost all virtual interaction in larger groups, smaller group, maybe a little bit of reflection here and there, but the idea being that a shorter block of time, but intensive interaction, and, you know, more interaction the entire time. That might be a model, because it gets at what you know, several people have mentioned, the value of this is when it's happening, I need to show up, I want the interaction, I want it to be live. So that's very helpful. Anybody else on the virtual webinar piece?
Let me just.
I was surprised how much having the visuals was just really good for, like, and I agree with what you said. I feel way more connected, even with people that are in my own town. Just to be able to see faces is so cool.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been hiding in a cave, so it's not. I mean, it makes sense. But I mean, I think there's some real value there, even for those of us who consider this an important part of our community, like the dispersed group. And I realize there's a huge amount of work that went into this, and thank you, by the way, for all that. It's huge. But I think, like, a couple thoughts about ways to capitalize on it. I think, like, those of us who meet in groups that are actually meeting, you know, every other week or whatever, the L3 groups, we could pick up some of these themes, especially if we thought about it. And also if we knew that, like, in 6 months we're going to have an afternoon where we revisit the same exact thing, we could maybe build in a couple touch points, you know, that keep it from being a one-off thing. But anyway.
Yeah, I really like the idea of setting a date for a follow-up in the future. I don't know, maybe a month from now or 3 months from now, or something that's not too, I mean, I don't know, January seems like kind of a good time to be doing this at the beginning of the year and all of that, you know, post-holidays. But I would really enjoy having something on the calendar that I'm thinking ahead for, where by that time we'll have all had a chance to go through everything that's been posted, really do the reflection stuff, post blogs in response to
Good.
reflection questions, drilling into things, and then can pick this conversation back up and more specifically talk about, you know, here's pieces that I'm wrestling with, or, you know, maybe, I don't know, we could do smaller breakouts so everybody gets a little more airtime, or I don't know, we could talk about that. But that's a great idea, Jonathan. We'll brainstorm about that a little bit and send thoughts.
I like the idea of potentially a sooner meeting that gives everyone a chance to get fully on board, get through all the material, do the reflection stuff, do some blogging or whatever, something sooner, and then maybe something further down the road where we pose another batch of questions, or maybe even, you know, feed into the process of a couple more video prompts, something, whatever, so that, say, 3 months or 6 months down the road, we all know this is what we're going to be talking about in 3 months. Yeah, go ahead.
And we should do a competition between the L3 groups, so Sea Change can kind of sweep everybody and show you like who really knows what's going on.
I didn't want to acknowledge the fact that the Sea Change groups did kind of, dominate in terms of just sheer numerical participation. That we do have to acknowledge that was true, but that's just, well, give us some of the rest of us a chance. We'll catch up. But
I call time zone reasons.
Yes, so we'll have to. That's good. We'll have to think through the time zone issues and see if we can be compassionate towards our friends on the other side of the globe.
Is Chris trying to make excuses? Is that what just happened?
Actually, there's some things that could happen on both sides of the planet around certain themes, and then we converge at some point. Anyway, good. Other thoughts? Anyone we haven't heard from about the usefulness, the helpfulness of this medium and these platforms?
I guess I found myself throughout the day having these 15-minute time chunks where I was, what Charles said about the temptation to just not do it because you can catch up on it later. I very specifically disciplined myself not to go there. Did everything, but then I was usually like 15 or 20 minutes. Okay. Like I really blocked the day out to do this thing. Now I'm kind of in limbo. So I think it would really be, I've heard that being said already, get all the content up. You have a deadline, which is nice, because then if it's up 3 months ahead, you know when it's going to be, and you can work through the material at your own pace, or you can cram on the last night if you want to, and then you're ready and you know what's going, and you've had time to process and blog if you're an introvert and all that. And then, because I found myself during the day going, I wish it was just like the line was just open so I could sit down and chat with somebody, and maybe in a less like, it would have been cool.
Conversation up.
But to have a facilitator during that time also to make sure that two people don't just like dominate the room and, and sort of, make sure that everybody who's there, even if it's sort of a less formal time, gets an opportunity. So I think that with some tweaks, this format could be super strong. It was great today. Don't get me wrong. It was really good. But I think it could be a little stronger.
Yeah, Adam, I really like that idea. I think it would take a little bit of further work, but I think we could actually do it where we have just kind of a permanently open space that people can pop in and out of, stay on, have chats throughout the day like an open room, and then specific times where we're all convening to have the conversation. Because on the flip side, I personally found it really helpful to be able to come away, read a thing, do something, head downstairs and make lunch, take care of this other little thing. You know what I mean? Like it did make it a lot easier to fit in the weekend and less disruptive, which means more people can engage it. But I really like, I totally resonate with some of what you're saying about finding ways to kind of make it a bigger space with more room for ongoing interaction. And there's different, I like a lot of what you're saying. I think there's a lot we can do to kind of make it a little more comprehensive in some ways.
The L3 coaching and counselor lines are now open. Yes. Okay, Justin, any other feedback that would be helpful? Mindy, anything that would be helpful just to hear back from the group going forward as we look ahead? I'm hearing a fairly high level of interest in continuing the conversation in some way and giving it further. This is a large enough topic that keeping this as an ongoing topic that we revisit periodically for an extended period of time, disproportionately compared to other topics, I think it's worthwhile because of the level of discovery that we're all going to be on in this realm. So I don't think it'd be hard to exhaust this topic with time passing in between the conversations, because there's just going to be a lot of lot of new stuff going on. I also noticed a certain competition going on with kind of parental kind of like who can display their child with the greatest pride, and like now we're doing. So if anybody else want to bring your children up on camera before we close out here? I know it's okay. Very nice, Chris. That's not you can bring all 4 of yours if you want before we just.
Can I say something serious though?
Yes.
I think this was excellent, and I really wanted to be part of it just to see how part of it was the experience of the process, and in our context particularly, it's wonderful to have access to other people's thinking that we just wouldn't get access to. Do you know what I mean? It's really good, and a whole nother layer and level of interaction and communal building that it's just a very rich experience to be a part of, and. So I would love to see this replicated, duplicated, triplicated, whatever, in whatever way, shape, and form. Not even limited to like once a year. I think there's like content blocks or topic blocks that can be covered over a weekend like this. I'd pay. I mean, like it's great. It's really, really good. So, and having gone through it, and you can re-access content, time zone issues become moot. So it was really good, and I can only cheer and say, yay, this was a great experience, apart from the content itself, which is also great.
All right, well, it's 8:05, so I think we will conclude there for now. Very much a semicolon, not a period. Looking forward to continuing to really drill into some of these conversations. I've really enjoyed it. I've loved getting to see some of the stuff that those of you who've been posting and in our conversations have been opening up. It's so funny. I know all of you fairly well, or very well in some cases, and yet there's always such a richness in kind of seeing a new facet revealed of each of you. So that's been a real privilege and very meaningful, and I'm really looking forward to kind of seeing what more comes out of that. So please do continue to engage that conversation in that process over the weekend and over the next few days as we move forward. Really looking forward to that.